I've done it, Brent.
Look at that.
I've done it. And I just opened it. I just wanted to I wanted to do it here for the first time.
It's like New Year's Eve.
Oh yeah, man. This is it. Ready?
See, that is a fine bourbon. Before you try it,
okay.
This is my favorite, and you know the history of it. Like there's a couple of different things that happen with this bourbon. It's a guy from Kentucky and a guy from Japan, and the guy from Kentucky actually crafts the bourbon, but the difference is the gentleman from Japan finishes it in a sherry cask. Whoa. And that's what makes it a little bit special. Yeah,
amazing.
Really
all right, here we go.
All right,
here we
Drum
go.
Roll. Drum roll.
Here we go. This better fucking be amazing. I can't complain. That tastes nice. That tastes nice.
Smooth.
I'm not a connoisseur, so I don't know if I'm trying to taste like the tannins or if I'm trying to like.
No, there's no tannin.
Okay.
You know, I'm not a fancy person when it comes to this stuff, but it's just it's very smooth.
So many people off by saying tannins.
Vanilla finish.
Vanilla.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nope.
Smooth.
I'm a fan. Brent, we're talking about Exile on Main Street.
We are. This is probably one of the greatest rock and roll records ever recorded. And that's a bold statement, but it holds up and people will support that. And I am very excited to hear your perspective on this record.
Yeah. Should I start? Should I just get going?
Yeah, man, give it to me. So let's just go over the kind of general. So 1972, it came out and it was on the tail of three great records already.
Yeah.
So Beggar's Banquet, Let It Bleed, and Sticky Fingers, my personal favorite. 18 songs on this record, a huge amount. But a lot of these songs were actually worked on before and we're just kind of kicking around. So songs like Loving Cup and Shine a Light was around from, I think, the Beggar's Banquet sessions or Let It Bleed when Brian Jones was still in the band. I waited to kind of drop this one on you because it is a lot to take in, but I'm interested in hearing what you have to say about it. It's a fire.
Yeah. Well, I got to say the length did not deter me, and nor does it even feel that long. Like I went through it maybe twice today, like just in today, because there's just so much to appreciate and love. But so I put this album on. I'd known Exile. I'd known a few songs, but I've never listened to it. Same with Sticky Fingers. I'd never listened to it all the way through. There's songs on here that I didn't know. Sweet Black Angel, Torn and Frayed. Those songs I'd never heard before. Yeah. And a lot that I hadn't heard, but I'd been very, much aware of the album. So going through this album, the one thing that I really felt like was it was like a big jam session. But I was just listening to him like, this is fun. This feels like guys that love to make music, making great music. I mean, just the jams that it felt like the songs were born of. It is what it felt like were just really great opportunities to just, guys, we're a great rock and roll band. We can literally do anything. We can make anything and we can write anything. And that's what we can do. And it just felt like it felt like there's this comfort in knowing that these guys, this is what they do. And they know this is what they do. And they're great at it.
A lot of stuff was going on for the Stones at this time. So they were tax exiles, hence the name Exile on Main Street. And they literally had spent all their money that they had allocated towards taxes. And they were at the point where they were going to get their assets, procured by the government. And so they fled to France. So Jagger, I think, went to Paris with Bianca Jagger, who he was with at that time. Richards went to Nelcote with Anita Pallenberg, his girlfriend, and bought a place there. And that was like his kind of exile hangout. And then the other guys, I'm not sure where they went. I'm not sure where Wyman went or Watts went or Wyman went. But
Watts, I think, was I think he said he was about seven hours away from where Richards was. So they were all in France.
Yeah, but they spread out.
Yeah.
So they all agreed that they would record the next record in Richards' basement at his Snellcoat mansion or retreat or whatever it was, with the mobile unit that they had. And so that's kind of, the first thing that makes this album cool is because it was just so loose and unstructured, right? And you can hear that in the songs. So the second thing was that they started working together at, I think it was 5 p.m. They started, they all kind of crawled out of bed, and then they would record till like 3 or 4 a.m. But not everybody was there. So Jagger was not there for much of it. Bill Wyman just kind of showed up, here and there. Mick Taylor was a new guy in the group, so he showed up quite a bit. He was always there. And of course, Richards lived there. So it was kind of hit and miss as to who was going to be, there. And a cool thing about the recording sessions, and I think this kind of bled into the why the record is so great, is because people just played, they just picked up and played instruments. So like Mick Taylor, for example, played bass when Bill Wyman didn't show up. So if he was not there, he would pick the bass up and jam with Keith Richards. And I think that's how Happy came together. So like Happy was Keith Richards. He showed up early, unusually, one day, because he just kind of happened to like wander into the room, and it wasn't even Charlie Watts. I think it was somebody else.
It was a producer, Jimmy Miller.
Yeah, Miller. And who was like, intoxicated on God knows what the entire time, by the way, right? According to Jagger, he said it was just like a bunch of drunks and junkies like running the show.
Wow.
And that's another thing that kind of, you hear in this, it's like an Aerosmith record during the classic period. It's just so loose and vibey, right? For that reason. But Happy came together because, I think that Richards just started playing the riff, and it came to him like that. And then, they kind of went with it. And he said, yeah, we could work on this. So let's somebody happened to hit the record button, and they kept it, and they added to that. But what you hear on the record is what just came out of his hands, at that moment, which is really cool. And that's the essence of that record. A lot of that Sweet Virginia, you can hear them. They're sitting around in a circle. You can hear chairs scraping on the floor. You can hear Jagger's voice crack. It sounds like it's like 4 a.m.
Yeah.
And that is the magic behind Exile on Main Street.
I totally felt it, man. And that's what I was realizing in listening to this. I'm like, it's not about the music being perfectly recorded, because this music was not perfectly recorded. It was recorded in like Richard's dingy, damp, dirty basement, and I was realizing as I'm listening to it, I'm like, this is what I love about music is really feeling the realness of it, which it seems like actually worked against them at the time when the album came out.
At the time, apparently when the record came out, people hated it.
Yeah.
Because there were too many songs, and the big complaint was that it was disjointed. It was kind of all over the place, and it didn't, it was just kind of chock-a-block with a bunch of different styles. But, for me, a lot of different things happened to make this record really cool. Like they got let go from, they got out of their contract with ABCO. And they kind of felt like they could do it if they wanted. Their manager let them go. So it was like, the lunatics are running the asylum now, right? Yeah. They were tax exiles. They were outlaws. They had that outlaw vibe. But the really cool thing for me about this record is that there are rock and roll variations that aren't just the obvious ones, right? So like, it's not just R&B. It's not just blues. It's not just soul. They get into folk. They get into rockabilly. They get into gospel. And you can hear all those things. Jagger apparently went to Billy Preston's church with him. And Aretha Franklin was involved in that. I think they went to one of she was involved somehow through the church. And Jagger was so kind of enthused by that he wanted to work that into the record somehow. And you can hear the gospel tinges in a lot of these songs. you know. There was rockabilly, like, you know, there was all kinds of stuff. There was soul. Like, it's just a fantastic melding of all kinds of great, you know, musical styles.
Well, it's great that you bring that point up, only because Julian Taylor, great Canadian musician here, you know, that you've had on your podcast, I've been lucky enough to have on mine, and I brought up the fact of, you know, how he's moved from genre to genre, and he's like it's all rock and roll to me. He said Exile on Main Street is my favorite Rolling Stones album. Cool. And they've got all kinds of genres on there, but nobody's trying to define them as anything but rock and roll. And he's like, that's just what I'm trying to do. And that's just so true of this record.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. There are no labels. There are no slottings.
Yeah.
There's no structure. There's no organization. You know, you listen to Goat's Head Soup, the album that came out the year after, and it's so, for me, just homogenized.
Yeah.
You know, it just sounds like there's no blood in it. You know, it just,
no,
you can hear the blood in Exile.
Yeah.
On Main Street in songs like Ventilator Blues. You know,
the blood is transferring from the vein to the syringe back into the vein in this album. That's what that feels like.
Oh, there's swing, you know, there's so much swing and rawness in this record.
So full disclosure here, I watched the Exile on Main Street documentary, the 1 hour Rolling Stones doc. And as I had listened to when I listened to the album, like, you know, we just said it, you know, it's all different kinds of genres, right? It's like, there's so much going on to it. Jack White is interviewed for this as well, and he's like, the thing about this album is that it like makes every music journalist question what they know, you know, because there's just so much going on with it. And I laughed out loud because I was like, exactly. So Lester Bangs of Cream Magazine, you know, the first time he listened to that, he's like, this is terrible, it's an awful album. And then months later, he's got them on the cover saying, like, this is like the greatest rock and roll. It takes a few listens.
It does.
You know, I see, that's why I don't get, like, I loved it right off the hop. I loved it through and through from the very beginning. Yeah. And I got more and more excited the further I get into this album.
Ironically, the thing that I would do, my only complaint, the only knock I have on this record is that it's a bit long. I would maybe make 2 records out of it.
They did. It was a double.
I've always felt like
it was a double.
You know, well, it's a double album, but it's not 2 albums.
Well, it's 2, but it's 2 records.
It's 2 records. I would have like a single release and another release. I don't know. There's just, I've always wondered why bands do that, right? I guess
they had
just
to
feel
for this.
Like
they had to for this. This was the Exile. This was the Exile album. They were away. This was not, and they were here. I know they went to Sunset Sounds to finish it and to record vocals and things like that. But
they did.
This I think represented a very distinct moment in time. And I think, you know, it's so interesting you say Shine a Light was written before this, because so much of it feels very present. So much about what Jagger writes, this almost feels like a Jagger singing like to Richards, this whole album. You know, it just feels like it.
You know who he's singing to? Brian Jones. So that song, Shine a Light, was called Get a Line on You originally. I can't get a line on you, something like that. And it was a kind of a reach out to Brian Jones, because Brian Jones was drifting away from the band and he was like super wasted on drugs the entire time. And he just kind of drifted off. And apparently Jagger took this, like the song was kind of floating around in 1968. That was when it first started. But the song was written initially about Brian Jones and the fact that he was drifting away from the band. And Jagger, it just kind of got lost in the shuffle, and Jagger dug it back up and rejigged it a little bit and released it as Shine a Light. But I suspect he never admitted this, but I suspect you hear those lyrics. Like, how does it start? Saw you in some hotel room like 10:09 or whatever.
Yeah, with a tear in your eye.
You're crying and like your eyes were all red and whatever. it sounds like he's kind of extending his hand to somebody, right? Somebody's having a problem and he's kind of reaching out and saying, I want to try and help you, which kind of runs counter to what people have said. And we talked about this in the previous episode about them trying to push Jones out of the band, and
Right.
people speculating that Jagger had something to do with his death, which is very interesting. But according to Jagger, Shine a Light was initially about Brian Jones.
Wow.
And even though he reworked it, I think it still was.
Yeah. It just feels so fitting though for Keith as well, just in everything that he was going through, and with everything that was coming in and out of the house, and everybody, it was, Anita Pallenberg saying, there's some guy just sitting on their couch and he just pulls a bag of smack out, and that's kind of what they would get into. And what was the other song with the angel, Let It Loose? I think we talked about the the woman on your arm, and again, just sort of this feeling of reference to heroin being in Keith, and it was just so interesting to hear some of the lyrics come out of this. And Rocks Off as well, right? I mean, Rocks Off is like, again, it's sort of like this brown sugar, this happy poppy wicked rock and roll riff with these really actually pretty dark connotations behind it that really speaking to what the band is saying. And it's just kind of like a lot of the songs, again, it had to do with Keith just sitting there wrangling a D chord, just trying to figure out how the song was going to go, and then they would figure it out, and all of a sudden they'd pick up and somebody get their instrument, Charlie was on the drum kits, and things would start happening, and then all of a sudden the songs would come out musically, but lyrically it was always kind of a mystery to me how and when these songs were written, based on what, again, just feeling like a lot of the content felt like was Jagger's kind of writing on the spot. How was he writing some of these songs?
I think he had written, he's not an on the spot writer as far as I know. Jagger was much more methodical, and Richards was much more kind of rock and roll. And that kind of underscores their entire relationship with each other and who they are as musicians and people and figures as we recognize them, right?
Yeah.
But that was the schism between those two, and that often led to a lot of kind of headbutting between the two as well. And if you think about it, Alex, so this was the height, I would say, maybe a little bit later, of Richard's heroin addiction.
Yeah.
Like this was his off the cliff kind of moment with Pallenberg. She was like strung out too, right? They were a mess. Richards wouldn't show up for stuff. Nobody knew where he was. He was in the house somewhere, but he'd be crumpled up in the corner, in some room, naked and just wasted. And so Jagger was not around. So it was like the lunatics running the asylum. People just come in and start playing and whatever. But Jagger, when things went to Sunset Sound Recorders, he took over, and he took control of the second part of the recording. And Jagger was very open with the press when he was talking about this record. He said, it's a good record. It's a good rock and roll record. But I'm going to tell you, I'm very bored with rock and roll right now. Wow. And I want to experiment. I want to do other stuff. And that's interesting because when you look at, what happened after Goat's Head Soup, very homogenized, right? Mm-hmm. Black and Blue, reggae, Emotional Rescue, do disco, like Miss You, like all that stuff, right? So Jagger kind of got his chance to step up in front of Richards because Richards was kind of sidelined by dope. And the 70s kind of reflected that. And Jagger got to do what he wanted to do.
It's just wild that this album even got finished, and that it was able to start and get finished because, we talk about, Richards being crumpled up in a corner and, being strung out on dope and things like that. But he would always have a song. He would always come up. He would always have the song ready to go, or they would always sort of figure it out, to this point where, Bobby Keys, the saxophone player, which was just like, what an incredible sound to these records, I think they were talking about, when he was let go from the band, Richards found him passed out in a bathtub, with booze and women, and Richards was like, we got to go. It's showtime. We got to get going. And he was like, I can't do it. I'm not gonna be able to do this. He's like, we're buddies, but Mick's not going to like this. And this is it. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, no matter how much dope Keith still did, or drugs and booze the Rolling Stones did, they were consummate professionals in like the most weirdest way, that it was like, no, it's showtime. We got to do this. This is our job. This is what we're doing. And if you can't do it, you know, no matter how good you are at what you contribute to the band, if you're not going to show up, you're not going to be part of it.
Yeah. He was a consummate artist. They said that about Jim Morrison a lot too. Like Jim Morrison could be like completely out of his mind on God knows what, right? Wow. Like 2 minutes to showtime. Right. And there would be like widespread panic. And then, you know, the curtain comes up and the roar of the crowd, and
boom,
he's out there.
Yeah.
And he's like Lazarus. He just comes to life, right?
Crazy.
It's a crazy thing, these guys. You know, but Richard's like, he's I don't know, man. I'd put my money on that guy. You know, I'm saying to you, he's just so resilient. I was saying to you, like, we worry about the world we're leaving behind for Keith Richards, right?
Yeah.
He's fucking guy's just indestructible.
Yeah.
He's just like, I would put my money on that dude.
Definitely. You know? Totally, man. Totally. Yeah. So what songs stand out to you from this album? Because I don't like, so we kind of, I saw your eyes light up to Ventilator Blues, because like that is just such a kick-ass tune.
There's so many things going on in that record.
Yeah.
Or in that song, rather. There's so many things going on in that song. There's a like little piano line that kind of weaves in and out, right? There's that great riff that Taylor wrote at the beginning. Ding, 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 like just classic blues, right? There's the you know, Jagger's delivery of those lyrics, and they're like the blood. You hear the blood in that delivery, right? It's just like a hammer. It's a weird time signature too, right? It's not like kind of 4/4, and apparently Charlie Watts had difficulty playing it.
Yeah.
And I think it was Bobby Keys who said, you know, kind of play it this way. Yeah. Do you know the story?
I do. Yeah. Yeah.
And he stood beside him and clapped. He clapped the beat to Charlie, who is like a consummate pro, right? Yeah. And Charlie Watts himself, bless him, was telling the story, saying Bobby had to stand beside me and like clap the snare out.
Yeah.
You know, because I didn't know where one was.
Crazy. Hey, just crazy. And then
cool.
Because then Bobby said he's like I don't know who the fuck I thought I was telling Charlie Watts how to play the drums.
Oh,
but bless him, he listened. He just seemed like that kind of a guy. And you know what, I gotta say, we're recording this episode on August 26th, and Charlie Watts just recently passed, 2 days ago now, yesterday. August 25th. And man, you know, I never thought we'd see a day when a Rolling Stone would pass, but of all of them, it had to be Charlie. It just seemed to be, you know, in everything you see him in, just the least rock and roll of all of them, but just always there, always this driving the beat. Just, I mean, he's Charlie Watts, man.
Yeah, I put up a post recently that, you know, kind of outline the fact that he was very workmanlike. There was no glamour, there was no glitter. It was just a workmanlike approach. And in essence, you know, the band listened to him, you know. He propelled them forward for 58 years, and he doesn't get his due, you know, in my opinion, enough for that.
He doesn't want it, you know.
He doesn't care. He doesn't care. Yeah. He doesn't care. Doesn't care.
Yeah. But I would see that, you know, it just felt like, you know, and he spent a lot of time at Richard's mansion there during the recording of Exile. You know, you said he was 8 hours away, so he wasn't about to be going back and forth all the time. So yeah, he spent a lot of time in that environment, and you know how he didn't get onto some of those things is pretty crazy. Like, I don't know what the extent of everybody's drug use or alcohol abuse was, but you know, it just didn't seem like that was his life.
Well, those lines were drawn, so there was a very firm divide. So Jagger, Bill Wyman, and Watts were on one side. They were not the enthusiasts at all. Richards, Bobby Keys, Miller, and a couple of the other guys were. and they were just a mess. And so there was a very firm divide there. And Bill Wyman, for his part, hated that whole session. He talked about it later, and he said, I was very frustrated because I wanted to play. And I would show up and my parts were being played for me by Mick Taylor, or, people wouldn't show up. Richards wouldn't show up. It was his bloody house, and he wasn't even there. We didn't know where he was. He was, God knows where. Mick wasn't there half the time. So he was very frustrated. And, it's funny because, you bring that idea back to the whole thing. It's their greatest album in my mind, the Rolling Stones. And for some of the members, they were, at the height of their frustration, which is such a paradox, and it's so ironic, right? But look what came of it.